Good evening, dear students. So today we'll solve one illustration which is about allowances. Basically, there are three types of allowances: fully exempted, fully taxable, and partially taxable. So in this illustration, we'll see how to tackle each type of allowances in the sum when you're calculating the taxable salary. So this is the illustration which we will discuss. So before solving this, let me read out the question for you and point-wise discuss each of the items. So Mr. A is employed at Hyderabad at a basic salary of rupees 25,000 per month, and he is also getting following allowances. So here are many allowances which they have given. Now we have to see which one is fully taxable, which one is partially taxable, and likewise. So the first one they are talking about is dearness allowance. Now, by now you know, I have given out the notes. By now you know that dearness allowance is fully taxable. So since it's fully taxable, you don't have to worry too much. Directly, you write down dearness allowance 2,000 into 12. And then whatever amount you get, write down directly in the outer column. Everything, because it's fully taxable. So the full amount will go in the outer column. Lunch allowance is also fully taxable, so everything 1000 into 12, everything in the outer column fully taxable, so full amount. Now servant allowance, now you have to remember one thing: servant allowances, if it's for the personal servant, then it's fully taxable. So here they have not mentioned that the servant is being used for official work, so we assume that it's for personal work, so it will also be fully taxable. So 1000 into 12, and the whole amount will go in the outer column. Now number 4, transport allowance. When it comes to transport allowance, you have to remember that it is partially taxable. That means there is an exemption. Transport allowance to any employee, whether government or private, shall be exempted up to rupees 1,600 per month. So how to deal with that exemption, I'll discuss when we are doing the solution. Let's move down to point number 5, education allowance. Education allowance also, there is an exemption which is rupees 100 per month per child for 2 children only. Here they are saying 3, but it should be 2, and it should be only 100, not 200. So this 200 you can write down in the upper column, and below you have to write down less exemption 100. That we'll discuss when we do the solution. Now, hostel allowance. Now hostel allowance also is the same thing. It's only meant for 2 children, but here they have mentioned only 1 child, so we'll stick to 1 child. When it's lesser than 2, it's fine, 1 child. And hostel allowance, it's only 300. They have given 500, they have received 500, but there is exemption of 300. Okay, 300 for 1 child. Now point number 7, conveyance allowance. Conveyance allowance also is partially taxable, but if they mention actual expense, expense is the exemption. But in this question, they have not mentioned any expense. They didn't say that conveyance expense was this much. So that means the full amount you have to write down in the outer column. There will be no exemption because no expense. Okay. Now let's go to number 8, overtime allowance. Overtime allowance is fully taxable, so treat it as fully taxable. Point number 9, officiating allowance. Officiating allowance is also fully taxable, so treat it as fully taxable. Now number 10, cash allowance. Cash allowance is exactly similar to conveyance allowance. If there is any expenditure, actual expenditure, you can subtract. If not, write fully outside. So in this question, they have not said that there is any expenditure in cash. So this full 12,000 into 12, you have to write down in the outer column. Now the next one is entertainment allowance. Now here they have not mentioned that he is a government employee, so entertainment allowance becomes fully taxable. And for a government employee, there is some exemption. We'll discuss about those later. Just now, you just remember that entertainment allowance will be fully taxable because he's not a government employee. Now next, medical allowance, fixed medical allowance, fully taxable. City compensatory allowance, also fully taxable. And finally, house rent allowance. House rent allowance, you know how to do the exemption, right? Those 1, 2, 3 point, and then the least one you have to select, and then you have to subtract. Those you do, since you've already done two sums, so by now you can do. So this is how the solution will look like. This, first of all, how you have to do, let me tell you. First, you prepare the format, the outer column, write down amount, and at the top you write down computation of gross salary of Mr. A. Please do mention for assessment year 2019-20. Do not forget to mention that. Then you write amount and all those particular columns you draw. Then you have to begin with basic salary, which is given in the question. So you write down into 12, it comes to 3 lakhs, write down in the outer column. Then dearness allowance, since it's fully taxable, write down in the outer column. Lunch allowance, fully taxable, write down in the outer columns. Servant allowance, personal use, fully taxable, in the outer column. Now transport allowance received. Now transport allowance, I told you there's an exemption, and I have mentioned the rate also. So first you write down whatever he has received, Mr. A has received, write down in the inner column. Okay, he had received 1,200 per month, so 1,200 into 12, 24,000. Do the calculation, okay? Show the calculation. Then you write less the exemption. This exemption you have to remember. Nobody will tell you in the exams. You have to remember that transport allowances exemption is 1,600 per month. You have to remember, and then you have to write down less exempted. This much. Write down below. It comes to 19,000. You subtract this 2, and whatever is remaining, write down outside. Education allowance also, it's exempted for 2 children, only rupees 100. So 100 into 2. This 2 is for 2 children. And then for 12 months. Then you write down in the outside column. The above one, 7,200, is what he actually received. Okay, the one he received, right at the top, and the exemption right below, subtract, right in the outer column. Next is hostel allowance. This also, there's only 300 for 2 children, but here he has sent only 1 child to the hostel, so he has received only for 1 child, so now you have to consider only 1. So it has to be 300 into 1 into 12, which is 3,600. Then you subtract, write down. Next is conveyance allowance. There is no actual expenditure, so fully taxable, write down in the outer column. Then overtime, fully taxable, write down in the outer column. Then officiating also, fully taxable, in the outer column, the full amount. Cash allowance, there is no actual expenditure, so fully taxable, in the outer column. Entertainment allowance, he is not a government employee, so fully taxable, so in the outer column. Fixed medical allowance also, fully taxable, in the outer column. City compensatory allowance also, fully taxable, so in the outer column. Now the final one, which is house rent allowances. Now house rent allowances, you've already done. First you write down what he has received actually in the inner column. Then below you write down exemption, then 1, 2, 3. The first one is actual HRA received. Second one is 40% of salary, because Hyderabad is not a metropolitan city, so 40%. Otherwise, you know, it should be 50 if it's Delhi or other metropolitan city. Then actual rent he paid, it's given in the question towards the end, minus 10% of the salary. Also, do not forget, for exemption purpose, salary is equals to basic salary plus commission plus DA if it enters. But in this question, they have not mentioned that DA will enter, and there is no commission, so you take only basic salary. So 10% of basic salary. So rent paid minus 10% of basic salary. Then you see the 3, whichever is the least, you write down in the inner column. Then you subtract those 2 and write the final in the outer column. So that's it. After that, the outer column you add everything. Whatever is the total will be your gross taxable salary. So that's it. You have the answer. Thank you so much. And yes, please, if you don't understand, please do tell me so that I can explain one more time.